I understand that Flyers Twitter especially likes to complain. And I unfortunately have started delving into more of Flyers Facebook groups and seen some of the absolute insanity that they put out, the insanity that exists over on Facebook. And I just want to point out to people, I don't do this in a condescending way. This is just like, this is where I'm at. This is where I think the team is. And this is just how I think this whole thing kind of lands right now. Elliotte Friedman put out a report over the weekend that the Flyers are considering an extension for Christian Dvorak because they want a center, right? So I'm going to go out here really quick and we're going to take a look and we're going to take a listen. And this is Elliotte Friedman over the weekend reporting on the Flyers and their potential conversations about an extension with Christian Dvorak, who they brought in here in the offseason and has been a very good player for them. All right, let's go out to Elliotte Friedman.
I was talking to a few teams today. Everybody's always looking for centers. You can never have enough centers. Well, the Flyers signed Christian Dvorak on July 1st last year to a one-year deal. When you sign a one-year contract, the earliest you can do an extension is on January 1st. The Flyers and Dvorak are talking extension. I think everybody here would tell you that it has to work for both sides to happen. He's played very well there. He's got 24 points in 35 games. And what I can say, Ron, is that there's other teams out there who do not expect Dvorak to hit the market now. They think he's going to sign, but both sides have to make it work.
Okay. We're just going to have a moment here. We're going to have a moment here to try to be fair and balanced as we are on the Russ Joy Show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on YouTube, Facebook, and X, and wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music. We're going to try to be really fair. And at the same time, fair might align with your thoughts and it might go totally against your thoughts, okay? So, Christian Dvorak, 24 points, 35 games. You extrapolate that out over the course of a full season, and you say, all right, you're probably looking at a guy that's going to be in the 60s point total-wise, right? If that were to continue over the course of an entire season. Could he get to 60 points? Could he get to like 55 points? Let's round down. Let's say 55 points. Would a 55-point Christian Dvorak be a good signing for this Flyers team? Well, let's put it in perspective. Let's have an actual conversation about where the Flyers are cap-wise. Let's have a conversation about what the Flyers have coming up in terms of cap availability, and let's talk about where the Flyers are in terms of committed salary beyond this season. As of right now, the highest paid forward on the team is Travis Konechny, $8.75 million. He is signed for a ridiculous amount of time that we are not going to discuss here because I don't want to make anybody drive off the road. Sean Couturier is the second highest paid forward, $7.75 million for a very long period of time that we're not going to talk about in its entirety because if we do, people will drive off the road. Those are your two highest paid forwards. Now, if you set aside Travis Sanheim's $6.25 million to be the top defenseman on the team, which at the time was kind of questionable, has proven to be a very good deal. He is a number one pair, not a number one defenseman, but a top pair defenseman. I think even on a really good team, I think Travis Sanheim has really grown into that role. We'll say 6.25 for him as a steal. Good job. Owen Tippett, $6.2 million for a very long period of time we shan't talk about so people don't drive off the road. Those are your top paid forwards. Konechny, Couturier, Tippett. 8.75, 7.75, 6.2. Okay. With all that in mind, do the Flyers have other forwards under contract beyond this year? They do. Noah Cates is under contract for 2 more seasons at $4 million to be preferably your third or fourth line center. Okay. And there were times this season where when he was playing with Brink and Forster, they were kind of the de facto number one line. I don't think that Cates is a number one center. I'm not really convinced that he's a number two center. I think he's probably somewhere around like a number 3, and that's not bad. Or maybe he ends up at $4 million being a really awesome fourth line center, and the Flyers rethink how they've been building that fourth line over the last few years. We've seen guys like Carl Grundstrom do well. We've seen guys like Nikita Grabenkin, who I still think is better than a fourth line player, play some meaningful minutes on the fourth line and look good. We've seen Denver Barkey get in the mix. I would almost make an argument that you could probably field a good fourth line that isn't all finesse and skill, but also isn't, this big plodding archaic fourth line. Okay. So Cates, $4 million. Garnet Hathaway has 1 more year left. at $2.4 million. I think you pretty much would try to sell that as fast as you can. Matvei Mishkov has 1 season remaining on his ELC before he hits restricted free agency at $950,000. Jet Lachenko, whenever he comes up, $942,000 against the cap when he plays at this level. Okay. And then you have Tyson Forster. Forster's set to become a restricted free agent in 2 years. He has 1 year remaining at 3.75. So you take all that into account and you say, all right, where should Christian Dvorak fit? Where does he fit? Timeline, age-wise, the like. Where does Christian Dvorak fit? Well, Dvorak, at least in terms of your timing, isn't totally in a bad spot age-wise. You don't look at him and say, all right, you're totally screwed if you sign him. He's not like 34. He turns 30 in February. He's not a guy that you want to sign long-term. I wouldn't say that a 5 or 6 year contract to Christian Dvorak is going to age particularly well. I would also kind of flip this on its head and say that, like, if you can bring Christian Dvorak in for 2, maybe 3 years, and then he comes up for another contract with a raised cap in 2-3 years, and by that point, you haven't been able to develop a guy like a Jet Lachenko, who they believe in, or a Jack Nesbitt, who they believe in. If you can't develop another center to at least be what Dvorak should be, a probably third-line center, well, then you have significant issues just schematically as an organization. If you can't develop a guy to replace that at the very least within the next 2 to 3 years, then this whole thing has been a massive fuck-up and failure, right? So we'll kind of set that aside. Age-wise, this doesn't annoy me if it's like a 3-year deal. A 6-year deal, like somebody had suggested, would be kind of crazy to me, right? The idea of going up until his age, well, let's see, you would do 6 years on top of it. So he would be 30 to start it. So he'd be starting the final season at 36. Like, I wouldn't love that. I think that would actually be a bad contract. Now, $6 million, if he's a third line center 3 years from now, all right, that will be quote unquote a steal. I also don't want to theoretically overpay a guy because he's had a really good start to a season where he has largely been tied to a point per game player in Trevor Zegras. And at the same time, I will use that same argument in the inverse to kind of point out why it's not a terrible idea to bring back Christian Dvorak. Listen, this Flyers team, for better or worse, is afraid to play Trevor Zegras as a center. They're petrified of it. They don't think that he can win in the faceoff circle. They don't think that he's a 200-foot player. They don't think he's a responsible defensive player. And so they have largely tied him to Christian Dvorak. And so you could say that in a whole bunch of ways. Is Zegras such a good player that he's getting this much better version of Dvorak than he's been in his career? That is entirely possible. Is Dvorak playing this kind of hybrid, he takes the faceoffs and then mostly shifts to wing? Is that allowing Zegras to be that point per game guy? That is also possible. Do I think it would probably be worth a look at some point to split them up for 15 or 20 games and to maybe have Trevor Zegras play center for 15 or 20 games in year 3 of a supposed rebuild? Yeah, I think it would be helpful. You know why? Because I think that ultimately, not only are you trying to negotiate with Christian Dvorak in his camp, you're also trying to figure out the value of Trevor Zegras. You know how it would probably help to figure out the value of Trevor Zegras? Figure out if he's a center or not. Once and for all, definitively. Because you would have to assume that at some point, Zegras and his camp are going to believe that he's a center. The Flyers are going to say, no, you're a wing. They're going to have different AAVs in mind. They're going to have different lengths of contract in mind. And if Zegras' camp is smart, they're going to try to price their client as being a center, which is going to cost more than a winger will. And the Flyers will conversely say, well, we're not playing him at center because we don't think he can be trusted to be a center. He's definitely played more as a winger. And then, after the faceoffs, he does kind of shift into more of that center role. But, we aren't so sure. Okay. Are you trying to pinch pennies on Trevor Zegras? Like, is there a thought here that the Flyers are only playing him mostly at wing because the Flyers want to work out a contract with Trevor Zegras priced as a wing instead of a center, and then he's going to sign a contract, and then they go, LOL, now you're the 2C. I don't think it's that. But, man, you kind of have to see what he is as a center. Like, they did this during the preseason. They did it in, very small spurts in the regular season so far, 30-odd games in. But, I'm sorry. I'm still not satisfied with, knowing for sure Trevor Zegras is or isn't a center. The Flyers also shouldn't be satisfied with so far deciding if he is or isn't a center. That's a problem. It's actually a failure. That's an organizational failure. That's a coaching? Is that the front office not wanting to get involved? I don't know. But I would like to see what Trevor Zegras is as a center. I'd also like to see, over a period of time, What do Christian Dvorak and Trevor Zegras look like separated? Because if you were to put Christian Dvorak on a line with like a Tippett and a Brink, or Tippett and like maybe move Cates to wing or something, and Dvorak is somehow able to unlock a Tippett and make Tippett a more consistent player, well then, hell yeah. Extend Dvorak even beyond the 3 years. If he is really, truly a guy who's going to get the most out of a player who's very inconsistent in a Tippett. But if you split him and Zegras up and Dvorak just becomes, at best a fourth line player, well, then that speaks more to Zegras' ability than it does to Dvorak's. If you split them up and all of a sudden Zegras is thrown into the deep end as a center and he can't swim without Dvorak there to kind of save his life, well, then you know that Zegras is only a point per game guy, largely due to the defensive responsibility that Dvorak brings to the lineup, and then maybe that changes the number on Zegras. But they're not splitting them up in a meaningful way over a meaningful period of time. You don't actually have any answers. So right now, it just seems like these two guys are so tied together that you can't really make heads or tails of, is Zegras getting this great play out of Dvorak relative to the rest of his career? Or is Dvorak unlocking this version of Zegras that we all hoped was possible and now apparently is? I don't know. I do know that historically, Christian Dvorak has not put up sensational numbers. He's been at or around 30 points most seasons in his career. He had a 20-game stretch in 2018-19, which we'll kind of throw out. And he had a 30-game run with Montreal a couple years ago. We could throw that one out. When he has played at least like 50, 60 games, he's hit the 30-point threshold in his career. And right now he's at 24, and I said he's probably on pace for somewhere around 50, 55 points. Okay. I like having an idea of how good a player is. I like having an idea of how reliant a player is on another. And right now, I don't think there's a way for us to actually, with a meaningful sample size, yes, we could break it out, depending on shift and depending on power play versus even strength and when those guys have been on different shifts. I'm sure we can try to extrapolate some data and try to get a better feel for how impactful each of those players are independent of one another. I'm talking about a real quantifiable data set, 15 games, 20 games of being split up. How good are each of these players individually? And how much of an impact do they have on their respective lines when they're not playing together? And once you have that, then by all means, negotiate, figure it out. Get a good contract in place with Christian Dvorak. Get a good contract in place with Trevor Zegras. Until you have that, I think it's really, really hard to make that determination and to get the job done and get the deals done. Like, I understand some of the social media angst about signing Dvorak, because you look at him and go, oh, there you go. That's a dude who's going to be 30 in February. This is a team in year 3 of a rebuild. This is a team that doesn't need to commit long-term to a bottom 6 forward. And those people are all right. They are. On the surface, you should not commit to a 30-plus-year-old center / hybrid wing who has never in his career surpassed 39 points, 38 points. Highest was 2019, 2020, didn't have 38 points. He's never gone beyond 38 points in his career. You don't extend that guy beyond 3 years under any circumstances. I understand that thought process. But here's the problem. And this is partially a Flyers problem, okay? The Flyers very clearly banked on the 2026 offseason as being a place that they were going to get an impact player, or maybe even 2. And that free agent class is gone. They will not get a meeting with Kirill Kaprizov. They will not get a meeting with Connor McDavid. And if they had some hope that they were going to somehow get Quinn Hughes out of Vancouver and that Vancouver was going to trade their franchise cornerstone defenseman to the team that their former coach decided to bail on them in the offseason for, that also didn't come to fruition. And if the Flyers are now going to flip this to be a 2027 argument because Connor McDavid and Quinn Hughes will both be available in the summer of 2027, I got news for you, homie. I'm not putting a whole lot into that, okay? I'm not. And I don't think the Flyers should either. Would it be a hell of a move in like NHL 25 or 26? Yeah, it'd be a great set of moves. Is it realistic? Not under any circumstances. So the Flyers went very many eggs in the free agent class basket, and now it's gone. And the depth that they might have hoped was going to be there in free agency is gone. And so now you're in a scenario where you either have to consider extending Christian Dvorak, trading Christian Dvorak, or letting Christian Dvorak walk in free agency without a legitimate, certifiable replacement on this roster or in this organization. Unless this team is so unbelievably high on Jetlachenko that they believe he's going to be ready for next year to assume the duties of the 3C or maybe even a 2C on this team, they don't have much of a choice. Now, again, if we're talking 6x6, no movement clause, no. If we're talking $6.5 or $7 million for 2 or 3 years, that seems very high. But on a 2 or 3 year commitment with no center in the pipeline, I could maybe be talked into it. On a 2-year deal, 3 years at worst. I will also point out, under no circumstances should any player on this team be given a no movement clause. Not a single one. No way. No, thank you. Like, the more I think about it, the more I'm like upset with myself to even consider $6 or $7 million, even on a 2 or 3 year contract for a bottom 6 forward. And yet I don't have much of a choice because the free agent options aren't there, which means that the cost of acquiring a similar player on the trade market is going to be astronomically higher because there is such a shortage of centers in this league. Now, could you make the case that instead of assigning that cap money to a guy like Christian Dvorak, this team should just sell the farm and go out and try to get a number 1 center? Well, of course. Yeah, that would help the team tremendously. What team is going to give you their number 1 center right now? What team right now is going to give you their number 1 defenseman? Another hole on this team, in this organization. Is Buffalo stupid enough to? Yeah, Buffalo's always dumb. But is there like another team out there realistically that's going to trade you their 1C or trade you a 2C that could maybe blossom into a 1C? Like, I don't see it right now. And I also don't see the Flyers like looking to make a hockey trade to go give a change of scenery to a guy to come in here. Like, does it move you? Does it move your spirit if Shane Wright becomes a trade target for this Flyers team? And what are you trading for him? And what are you hoping to get out of him? Like, is there still some hope that he's going to somehow blossom into a 1C in the right circumstances? Like, I'm not so sure. So this is part of the general frustration. And I understand it among Flyers fans that, like, you're in year 3 of this rebuild. There's not a 1C in the system. There's not a 1D in the system. There's maybe a number 1 goalie in Zavragan in the system. And there is some good depth there. You want to say Kolosov could be good. You want to say that Bjarnason could be good. Vladar's been really good. But like realistically, you don't have a 1C and you don't have a 1D. You're in the 3rd year of this rebuild. It doesn't look like you're going to end up in the lottery. And there are no centers coming up in free agency. And the price of a center on the trade market is probably going to be astronomically high. And so now you're looking at potentially signing a 30-year-old bottom 6 forward to maybe $6 million plus a year. I get why people are frustrated. I get it. I do. And all of that said, I'm not so sure that you're going to get the same Trevor Zegras without Christian Dvorak because this team will not separate them for a meaningful enough segment of time that we can get an actual sample size and figure out what we have in each of these players. So that is the problem, my friends. I get the frustration. And at the same time, I think Dvorak's been really good for this team. I think that Zegras has obviously been very good for this team. I think keeping the two of them together for at least 2 or 3 more years, if this is how they're going to play together, is still a net positive for this team.